I said before that one of the best clues or hints about how our holographic universe works is our kids' video games. If you've never played one of these games, I recommend going, for free, to Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean online. What's the first thing you do when you want to play almost any video game? You create a player to play the game for you. And Disney has very amazing technology, at least it's amazing to me, that lets you design your player in great detail, down to the shape of its nose. Your first choice, of course, is what gender you want your player to be, male or female. Then you can choose the shape of the body from 5 different appearances. And then the height, from short to tall. You can even choose the color of their skin, ranging all the way from pale white to red to brown. Then it's time to focus on the face, ranging anywhere from thin to filled out. And then the width of the face, and the height of the forehead, and the roundness of the face. Now it's time for the jaw, the width, the length, the angle of the chin, the size of the chin, and then the width and thickness of the lips. And we finish working on the face with the cheeks, from fat to thin. You have your choice of eye color, the shape of the eyebrows, and even the spacing of the eyes. Next, it's the size, angle, and position of the ears, the length of the hair, and 8 different shades of hair color. Then you can choose all different styles and colors of the shirt, vest, belt, pants, and shoes. And now that you've decided what you want your player to look like, down to the shape of its nose, you can give it a name. I know that most parents think they choose the name for their child, but I also know in my case that was not true. My parents wanted to name me Craig, but it was changed at the last minute to Stephen. And I've heard other stories like that as well. I can imagine my infinite eye created me that way as well to play a game, choosing certain wave frequencies from the field to make my body, down to the smallest detail, including the shape of my nose and my name. But the point is, instead of calling us the finite eye, I prefer to call us players for our infinite eye. William Shakespeare may have had it right some 400 years ago when he said, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players." We've tried thinking of ourselves a lot of different ways over the years, such as lost souls, fallen angels, sinners that need to be saved, immortal spirits on a quest for perfection, apprentices in training to be gods, kindergartners in the school of life, flesh and blood bodies and nothing else. And most of those ideas haven't worked so well for many of us in terms of bringing lasting peace and joy and satisfaction to our lives. Perhaps we can at least consider the idea that we might be players for our infinite eyes and see where that gets us. At this point, the question often comes up, do I have my own personal infinite eye for whom I am the only player? There is no way to answer that question with any certainty, because there is no way for any of us on this side of the field to know what's going on the other side of the field. Carl Pribram said our brain was a holographic receiver and translator and that's all. And Bashar said our personality constructs are simply not designed to do anything except receive wave frequencies and translate them into holograms, and then perceive and react and respond to those experiences. In other words, every experience we have is a holographic experience, no matter what kind of experience it is, and whatever goes on the other side of the field outside our holographic universe is totally unknowable to us, regardless of what the New Age would like us to think about altered states of consciousness. But still, it's an interesting question to speculate about. Do I have my own personal infinite I? Let's look at the two extreme answers. The first answer is that there is only one infinite I for all the players that exist. This is essentially what God is to most people. And maybe that's true. The other extreme is that every player has its own personal infinite I, meaning that there are as many infinite I's over there, on the other side of the field, as there are players here, on this side of the field. There's no question our egos would like us to think we're very special and that we must each have an infinite I that created us and looks after us and only us. And maybe that's true. But in between these two extremes is what makes more sense to me and is supported by another metaphysical source, Seth, channeled by Jane Roberts. In her Oversoul 7 trilogy, Jane explores the idea that one infinite I can have a number of players representing it in the game, even different players living at different Earth times, and maybe even players on different planets or in different universes, called parallel universes by the quantum physicist Fred Alan Wolf wrote a book called Parallel Universes: The Search for Other Worlds. In that book he said, "What is a parallel universe? Like an everyday universe, it is a region of space and time containing matter, galaxies, stars, planets, and living beings. In other words, a parallel universe is similar and possibly even a duplicate of our own universe. Not only in a parallel universe must there be other human beings, but these may be human beings who are exact duplicates of ourselves and who are connected to ourselves through mechanisms only explainable using quantum physics concepts. The possibility exists that parallel universes may be extremely close to us, perhaps only atomic dimensions away, but perhaps in a higher dimension of space, an extension into what physicists call superspace. There is also a theory in quantum physics called the many worlds interpretation, which Dr. Alan Guth referred to in the video you just saw. The Wikipedia explains it this way. Many worlds claims to resolve all the paradoxes of quantum theory, since every possible outcome to every event defines or exists in its own history or world. In layman's terms, this means that there is a very large, perhaps infinite, number of universes, and that everything that could possibly happen in our universe but doesn't, does happen in some other universe. Prior to many worlds, this universe had been viewed as a single world line. Many worlds rather views it as a many-branched tree, where every possible branch of history is realized. So there is speculation among very prominent and respected quantum physicists that other worlds might exist simultaneously with our world, and that we might have a connection to them. In short, the many worlds interpretation says that all possibilities occur in one universe or another. Think of it this way. When you turn right in your holographic universe, another player from your infinite eye turns left in a parallel universe. That way, your infinite eye has the chance to experience all possibilities. It would make sense to me that one infinite eye would want to take advantage of all these possibilities to play and express itself creatively, and have many players in many lives and in many worlds. This also presents an interesting new twist to past lives, for example. Since we know that space-time is only a function of the hologram and doesn't really exist, perhaps past lives are simply present lives being lived simultaneously by another player from the same infinite eye. And since we share the same infinite eye, we have a connection to that other player, which we are mistakenly calling a memory, through our mutual infinite eye. Personally, I have no problem with the idea that my infinite eye might have other players than just me, as brothers and sisters are normally not bothered that their parents have other children. But if you want to think about your infinite eye as your own, that's fine. It really doesn't matter. The possibility that you might share an infinite eye with another player has no relevance or bearing on how you play the game. But why would an infinite eye create a player like me, or many players, in the first place? What's our purpose? Frankly, I can't imagine an unlimited desire to play and express itself creatively. Do you need a reason to write a song, or paint a picture, or play a sport? No, you just do it for the fun and joy and excitement of it. It would make sense to me that my infinite eye created me for the same reason, for the sheer joy and excitement of playing a game. The same reason we build bigger and better roller coasters and Ferris wheels, and Disney worlds and sports teams. In other words, this game on Earth may be, to our infinite eyes, what a great roller coaster or Ferris wheel is to us. A fantastic, interesting, exciting ride in an amusement park. If I were as good at playing tennis as these guys, for example, just for fun, I might tie one hand behind my back and see how well I played. Then I might even put on a blindfold. In other words, I'd actually create limitations and restrictions just to explore the possibilities and see what would happen. In the same way, an infinite eye might have created a game of finite limitations and restrictions, what we're going to call the human game, and then created us as players to play that game, since as an infinite being, it couldn't play the game itself. But the truth is that we don't know, and will never know, as long as we are in the holographic universe, exactly why an infinite eye created us. And frankly, it's pointless to ask why, since the answer wouldn't change anything about how we react or respond to our experiences. All we know for sure is that we are in a holographic 3D total immersion movie of finite limitations and restrictions. And please note that I did not say we are in a movie of pain and suffering. Your infinite eye is not a sadist or some kind of ogre. It does not create experiences just to watch you suffer. All pain and suffering are a choice we as players make to the experiences we have because of our beliefs, judgments, and resistance. We'll talk more about that in Part 5 of this workshop series. This human game model, however, clearly does not view the holographic universe as a school or as a training ground or as a kindergarten that we should all graduate from and become something else. In fact, the human game model says that we, as players, are perfect exactly as we are, and doing the job exactly as the infinite I wants us to, by freely reacting and responding to each and every experience it creates for us. Which, by the way, means that no reaction or response we have can ever be wrong, since the infinite I values each and every reaction and response equally. And according to the many worlds interpretation, whatever reaction or response we don't have is going to play out in another universe anyway. It is only we as players who judge ourselves and our reactions and responses to the experiences we have, thereby causing our pain and suffering. There are a number of analogies I use to try to explain this more clearly, which might help in understanding the nature of our relationship as a player to our infinite I. One of those analogies is called the big toe, and it goes like this. My infinite I, in its unlimited desire to play and express itself creatively, created an ocean, and then decided it wanted to go swimming. But it wanted to test the temperature of the water first before diving in. So it created me as its big toe and stuck me in the water. My job was to have the feelings in reaction and response to the temperature of the water, and that's all. And no reaction or response I could have would be wrong. If the water was cold and I shivered, that's what the infinite I wanted to know. It was only I who judged my shivering to be wrong. If the water was hot and I pulled back, that's what my infinite I wanted to know. It was only I who judged my reaction to be wrong. As its big toe, I was fully connected to my infinite I all the time, whether I was aware of it or not. And the feelings I had were transmitted back to my infinite I through that connection. But as the big toe, I did not think I really was the infinite I. I was simply an aspect of the infinite I created to test the waters. I did not try to be my infinite I, or think that I should be. I did not focus on what I wasn't, but totally enjoyed being what I was, a big toe. And I had a lot of fun being that, by the way, as long as I didn't judge or resist my job, or try to become something I wasn't. At other times, I like to think of myself as an astronaut sent by NASA to explore what the moon is like. NASA determines all my experiences, and my job is to react and respond to what I encounter, and then send my findings back to Houston. My job is not to tell NASA what experiences I think I should be having, or that the experiences it is creating for me are not the best ones, or the right ones, or the ones I want. If I tried to do that, they'd probably bring me home, and I wouldn't be an astronaut anymore. My only job is to have the experiences NASA creates for me without resistance or judgment, and send the results back. Now, there is a possibility I might have a reaction or response that is unexpected or unusually interesting. And NASA might decide to change my experiences to explore that possibility even further. But they don't have to, and they might not, for their own reasons. Likewise, I could also put in a request for a particular experience. As long as I only sent the request once and didn't keep bugging NASA if I didn't get my request fulfilled, as if they didn't hear me the first time. But again, NASA doesn't have to fulfill my request. In fact, they may have very good reasons why they don't want me to do that. Reasons they understand from their perspective, but I don't from mine. It's only my arrogance that would think they should give me what I'm asking for, which might in fact interfere with something better they had planned for me. I could go on with other analogies, but I hope you get the point. While I'm on the subject, I'll also take this opportunity to expand my comments about the feedback loop between an astronaut and NASA, between a player and its infinite eye. An infinite eye creates an experience, and the player reacts and responds to that experience. The feelings the player has are transmitted back to the infinite eye. Those feelings, that reaction and response, might have an influence on the next experiences the infinite eye chooses for its player, but they don't have to. An infinite eye is always free to choose any experience it wants its player to have, regardless of any feedback from the player. This, of course, would be true as well for any requests the player makes to its infinite eye. Those requests will all be heard, but do not in any way have any power to decide the next experiences. So please don't get confused thinking there is some co-creation going on. There isn't. A player's reaction and response may influence an infinite eye, and it may not. An infinite eye downloads an experience. The player uploads the feeling it has in reaction or response to that experience, and that's it. That's the feedback loop according to this model. Bottom line is that the human game model suggests that we, as players, were created to be aspects or representatives of our infinite eye to do a specific job. In this case, to experience the limitations and restrictions of the finite holographic universe, and have the feelings associated with our reactions and responses to those experiences. That's our purpose as players. It is the feelings we have as players that the infinite eye is interested in, not our thoughts. And all those feelings are transmitted back to the infinite eye through our constant connection. But we can only have those feelings if we have total free will to react and respond in any way we choose to each and every experience. No, we have no choice of what hologram we will experience. That is determined by the infinite eye. But we have total choice over how we want to react and respond to it. Now, there's one last question to address before we can talk in depth about the human game model. What about other people in my hologram? Are they real, or am I creating them too? First, you have to remember that nothing in your hologram is real. Not the people, not the presentation you're watching, not even your body. It's all a hologram. And by definition, a hologram isn't real. At least not in the way we have always thought about things as being real.
But surprising new clues are emerging that everything, you and I and even space itself, may actually be a kind of hologram. That is, everything we see and experience, everything we call our familiar three-dimensional reality, may be a projection of information that's stored on a thin, distant, two-dimensional surface. Sort of the way the information for this hologram is stored on this thin piece of plastic.
Is the three-dimensional world an illusion in the same sense that a hologram is an illusion? Perhaps. I'm inclined to think yes, that the three-dimensional world is a kind of illusion, and that the ultimate precise reality is the two-dimensional reality at the surface of the universe.
When we look at some of the modern scientific views of reality that have tried to get down to the nitty-gritty, we see that at its ultimate level, say in M theory or string theory, that reality is not solid, it's mostly empty space, and whatever solidity it has seems more to resemble a hologram picture rather than material, harsh, solid reality.
So let's change the question a little. Do the other people I see in my hologram exist as separate individuals? Are they players as I am, with their own infinite eyes? Or are they just created by my own infinite eye for my personal hologram and have no independent life of their own? Even among those of us who have been actively testing this model, there is no real agreement on the answer to this question. Let me give you both sides. One side says that your infinite eye is creating everything in your hologram, including the other people you see. And to a large extent, that's true. Nothing can appear in your hologram. It's true. Nothing can appear in your hologram that your infinite eye did not create for you. If or when you start to test this model in your own life, that is the best and easiest approach to take. Otherwise, you have the tendency to give power to someone out there in your hologram, another player, and fall back into the same traps you've always been in. So there is no harm in taking the approach that your infinite eye creates everything in your hologram, including the other people. But this idea also smacks, to me, of solipsism, the philosophy that you are the only thing that really exists in this universe. So once you have gotten very comfortable with no longer giving any power out there to any person, place, or thing, you might consider another answer to this question. And that is that certain other people you have interactions with might be players in their own right, acting out their own holographic 3D total immersion movie, which somehow miraculously can merge with your own holographic 3D total immersion movie, like two virtual reality experiences interacting. The closest example I could find of this is the movie Disclosure, with Michael Douglas and Demi Moore. Let's explore that possibility a little more, using me, for example. If a hologram is like a total immersion movie, someone has to write the script for everything that happens in my hologram. According to the consciousness model, that someone is my infinite eye. And let's say my infinite eye wants me to experience a car accident, for whatever reason, which is exactly what my own infinite eye did. My infinite eye can create a hologram where I have that car accident by myself, with no one else involved in the accident, which is what happened to me, and that's fine. But let's say there are other reasons why my infinite eye would prefer me to experience a car accident that involved other people rather than just me alone. My infinite eye could send out an email across infinite land asking if there is any other infinite eye who wants its player to be part of this car accident. Maybe my infinite eye gets some positive responses from other infinite eyes, and together these infinite eyes work out the details and write a joint script for this accident movie. But there is one catch. No player can ever say or do anything in any other player's hologram that their own infinite eye has not requested or approved. In other words, no one can ever be a victim of anything that is said or done in any hologram they experience because their own infinite eye has either written the script itself or had 100% script approval. In short, there are no victims or perpetrators ever. Every experience is a gift from your infinite eye exactly the way it happens, and it can happen only in the way your infinite eye has chosen for you, including whatever any other player says or does in your hologram. So, the players get in their car accident. Each player can, and probably will, experience that accident slightly differently than any other player, since each player has its own individual hologram as its reality. In fact, two players will often disagree, honestly and sincerely, about what actually happened in that accident. We already know that virtually everyone who witnesses a car accident will have a different version of the crash. But the player that I get into a car accident with, more than likely, will be another player representing its infinite I. So, while my infinite I created that person in my hologram, they actually do exist as a separate player with their own beingness and their own infinite I. This might be true for all the other people who have an impact on our lives. I would guess that almost anyone who has a major speaking part in your holographic 3D total immersion movie might be another player, whose infinite I has agreed for them to read the script your own infinite I wrote for the experience it wants you to have. But be careful. If you start giving power out there to other people you see in your hologram, just because they might be another player, you can end up in a lot of trouble. Robert Scheinfeld, the one who got me started in this model, says that other people serve three main purposes in your holographic experiences. First, to reflect something you think or feel about yourself. Secondly, to give you the gift of information or insight. And thirdly, to set something in motion to support you. I'm going to add a fourth reason to that list because what about all the other people you see that you don't really interact with, that don't have speaking parts in your holographic 3D total immersion movie? Are they players as well? No, maybe. But if we look at a Hollywood movie, there are a lot of extras whose job is simply to fill up the movie to make it look more real, who otherwise have little or no impact on the movie. If there were not thousands of people walking the streets of New York, your movie would look pretty strange. Watch Tom Cruise's reaction when there is no one else around at 9:05 in the morning in New York, in the movie Vanilla Sky.
Open your eyes. Open your eyes. Open your eyes. Open your...
effects for John Adams. You see us dressed up today because we are creating a group of spectators for the launch of the first manned spaceflight, and about 15 of us will be multiplied to be 10,000.
If we can do that with our technology, make a crowd of 10,000 from 15 extras, imagine what an infinite eye could do from the field. So, in general, the other people that you see in your hologram are players whose infinite eyes have volunteered to play a role for you and to read the script your infinite eye has written, or they are extras created by your infinite eye to fill up your reality. But keep this in mind always. As far as your hologram is concerned, everyone you see in it is an actor playing a part, reading the script your infinite eye wrote for you. Remember the Truman Show? Everyone Truman met every day was an actor, without exception. No one could say or do anything in Truman's life that was not scripted by Ed Harris, of course. Now, when an actor is finished reading his script in Truman's life, that actor may leave the movie set and have a life of its own to go to. But as long as he is in the Truman Show, he is an actor, not a player. According to the human game model, this is true in your holographic 3D total immersion movie as well. The same thing applies to the movie The Game. Everyone was an actor playing a role, reading a script in Michael Douglas's game, even his brother. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. Thank you, William Shakespeare. All right, it's time to look more closely at how this human game works. And once again, I want to acknowledge Robert Scheinfeld for introducing me to his version of this model. Let's start with a very short description. The human game is a series of outer experiences in the holographic universe that the player reacts and responds to in order to produce inner experiences, in order to share those feelings with its infinite eye through the connection between the two. As players, we do this all the time. We go to a movie, we play a sport, we watch a sunset, or go to a music concert in order to have an inner experience from the outer experience, in order to have the feelings associated with that experience. But we don't always choose experiences that are nice and blissful. Apparently, we have no problem voluntarily going to a horror movie, or through a haunted house on Halloween, or participating in extreme sports. Crazy, scary, even dangerous stuff, just to have the inner feelings. So we should also have no problem understanding that our infinite eye would create a game like this for us to play as well. And like most games, the human game is divided into two parts. The first part of the human game is designed for the player to experience as much limitation as possible, like going into a cave to the deepest, darkest place on a treasure hunt. Once the player has discovered the treasure, it has to find its way out of the cave again and bring the treasure home. That's the second part of the human game. What's the treasure in this case? Well, instead of gold or jewels, there's a little note inside the treasure chest that says, "It isn't real. It's all a game." That's the treasure that can radically change your life, much more so than gold or jewels. But just like in any treasure hunt, there are rules to the human game. According to this model, these are the rules for the first part of the human game. See if any of these rules are true in your own life. Rule number 1. The players must forget who they really are, a player, and believe they are something else instead. At the extremes, for example, that they are their body or that they are their infinite I. Rule number 2. The players must believe their holographic experiences are real and what they perceive with their senses is actually happening out there in some objective and independent reality. Rule number 3. The players must believe what they encounter out there has power over them and the power to affect their lives. Rule number 4. The players must believe in the judgments of good and bad, right and wrong, better and worse, good and evil. Rule number 5. The players must believe there is something wrong with the reality they see out there that needs to be changed or fixed or improved. Rule number 6. The players must believe they have the power to create a different reality than what they are experiencing and therefore feel defective and deficient, more limited, when they fail. Rule number 7. The players must believe they can think their way out of the first part of the human game by using their mind, or love their way out of it by using their heart. Rule number 8. The players must believe they can make something happen, and when they fail, blame themselves for not being smarter or better or working harder. Rule number 9. The players must believe there are goals to be reached, or agendas to be satisfied, or lessons to be learned. Rule number 10. The players must believe they, and they alone, are responsible for meeting their own needs and wants, which they have to fight for. Rule number 11. Fear and resistance are the foundations of the first part of the human game, and judgments and their resulting beliefs are the glue that keeps the illusions together. And rule number 12, these illusions must never break down, or the players would see through the game and it would be over. To put it briefly, the first part of the human game was designed to experience limitation and restriction in all shapes and sizes, and all these rules lead to that. So if you have been following the rules, and you literally could not do anything else, you have most likely experienced a great deal of limitation in your life. You just didn't know why until now. I understand that you probably didn't like the limitation of the first part of the human game, that it didn't feel good, that it didn't feel right, and that you think you have been doing something wrong. But you haven't, and neither have I. We've been playing the human game exactly as we should, exactly as our infinite eyes created us and wanted us to. Even the judgment and resistance haven't been wrong, since they led to more limitation. In other words, we've been doing a fantastic job as the players we were created to be. But since the first part of the human game is intentionally the opposite of the natural state of an infinite I, it takes an enormous amount of power to create it and keep it going. I really like the analogy of a roller coaster in an amusement park. It takes an enormous amount of power to defy gravity and pull those heavy cars filled with people up the first hill. It's unnatural. It's uncomfortable. It's work. I don't know what goes on in your mind, but I often hear myself saying, "Why the hell did I agree to do this? Am I crazy? Let me off of this thing. I'm going to die today. This is nuts. I'm getting sick. Who designed this crazy ride? I'm going to kill them when I get off. if I survive. Yes, I would resist that first hill with everything I had. I didn't like it, it didn't feel good, and I questioned my sanity for getting on the ride in the first place. Likewise, going as much as possible into human limitation produces the same reactions. It's supposed to. That's the game. But another reason I like the roller coaster analogy is that we can never experience or appreciate the ride to come if we don't go up that first big hill. Like the human game, a roller coaster has two parts. You go up the hill in the first part and down the hill in the second part. If looked at objectively, the first part of a roller coaster is no better or worse than the second part, even if it might feel that way to the people on it. In fact, the second part of the roller coaster could not exist without the first part. So there can be no judgment that one part is better than the other. That's also true for the human game. Someone riding on the second part of the roller coaster is no more enlightened or better or more advanced or ascended than someone going up the first hill. They're just at a different point on the ride, that's all. The last reason I like this analogy is that it reverses how we normally think about limitation. Rather than going down into limitation or down into the depths, the first part of the roller coaster is up. So instead of saying that we reach the bottom in our lives, it's better, in my mind, to say that we reach the pinnacle or the peak or the apex of limitation, when it's then time to start playing the second part of the human game. For me, this also helps take away the judgment. So let me use me as an example to make this more real. I was about to turn 62 years old, January of 2008, sitting in my apartment in Greenville, South Carolina. And I realized I had no job and no one wanted to hire me. I had no car. I had no money. I had no relationship, no one to love. I had 2 marriages, each of which failed after about 15 years because of my own issues. Although I had a few close friends, none of them lived within 1,000 miles of me. I had a wonderful family, including 3 fantastic grandchildren, but other than my daughter and her husband, I hardly got to see them. I had written 2 books that no one was buying and apparently no one wanted to read. I had no future plans, no idea how anything would change. In other words, I didn't think I could ever become any more limited in my life. But the interesting thing was that I was not upset about any of it. No fear, no regret, no judgment, no panic, no feeling sorry for myself. I was completely neutral about it all, not resisting any of it, simply saying, "Oh, so that's how it is," and embracing my situation without needing it to change. 2 days later, I went over the top of the first hill of the roller coaster and moved into the second part of the human game, thanks to watching a DVD series from Robert Scheinfeld, who gave me the missing piece of the puzzle I had been working on for 40 years. Looking back later, I had the thought that since I was no longer judging or resisting my experiences, and therefore no longer had any reaction or response in the face of limitations and restrictions, I had become virtually useless to my infinite I as a player in the first part of the human game. So for me, the first part was over. I had found the treasure at the bottom of the deep, dark cave, and now it was time to bring it back home. And so I started playing the second part of the human game. The second part of the human game is the opposite of the first part. Rule number 1, The player knows what it has been calling reality is not real at all, but a hologram created by its infinite eye to play the human game. This game is being played by consciousness, in consciousness, and for consciousness. In fact, there is no out there, no independent objective reality. Rule number 2. The player knows once it has moved into the second part, all holograms experienced by the player will be totally in support of coming out of the cave rather than toward more limitation and restriction. Rule number 3. The player knows it can never and will never experience anything in any hologram its infinite eye has not created and wanted to experience, and that its infinite eye has written and approved the script being used by anyone else appearing in the player's hologram. No one else in the player's hologram can ever do or say anything its own infinite eye has not requested. Rule number 4. The player knows its focus changes from thinking to feeling. In this second part, there is nothing to analyze, dissect, or understand. Never any reason to ask why. Thinking and studying are now only the result of an inner curiosity to expand one's knowledge instead of being required to figure out the world or make a player better or more enlightened. Rule number 5. The player switches from assigning power out there to make a hologram real to taking its power back from it. When holograms appear that cause any kind of discomfort, it is an opportunity to recognize the hologram was in fact not real at all and reclaim that power from it. Rule number 6. The player leaves behind any and all judgment of anyone or anything in any hologram at any time, such as good and bad or right and wrong. As Rudyard Kipling said in his poem, If you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same. Rule number 7. The player knows that since everything is created specifically for it by its infinite eye, there is never anything that needs to be fixed or changed or improved in the holograms it experiences. The only thing a player might want to do is change its own reaction or response to an experience. Rule number 8. The player switches from being proactive to being reactive. There is nothing the player ever again needs to make happen. In other words, the player simply follows its inner excitement as long as it is fun and brings total joy. Being reactive means that when a holographic illusion appearing out there seems to require a decision, a response, or an action, the player takes it, as long as it does not include discomfort. Or when the player feels an internal motivation or impulse to act, it does. Rule number 9. The player lives from moment to moment, one day at a time. There are no goals, no planning, no targets, no objectives, and no agendas. There is no past and no future. Just now. Rule number 10. The player develops a deep love and sincere appreciation for its infinite eye, for itself as a player, and for all the first part holographic creations, even though at the time of the experience they may have seemed less than joyful. In fact, the player marvels in awe at the beautiful, perfect, and miraculous job the player did in the first part to convince itself it was real, and that the holographic world it saw around it was real. Rule number 11. the player has the knowing and the complete trust its infinite I will take care of all its needs, including money, and there is no reason to worry about anything. The infinite I would not create a hologram it wanted the player to experience if it did not also give it everything it needs for that experience. Rule number 12. The player wakes up each day looking forward with curious anticipation to the experiences its infinite I will create for it that day, and the player buckles up, relaxes, and enjoys the ride. That we've learned thus far in these workshops and talk about how life apparently works in a holographic universe according to these models. 1. Your infinite I creates you as a player to represent it in the human game. 2. Your infinite I, not you, decides on an experience it wants you, the player, to have and writes the script for that experience by choosing the specific wave frequencies in the field that will create this holographic 3D total immersion movie. 3. Your infinite I downloads the wave frequencies in this script to your brain, along with everything you as the player will need to have this experience, including the money and the support from other players as appropriate. We'll talk more about this in Part 5 of the workshop. 4. If there are other players involved in your experience, their infinite I's download to their brains their own individual scripts and their parts to play in your movie that have been written or approved by your own infinite I. 5. Each player has its own unique and individual experience as everyone acts out this movie reading their scripts. Each player has total free will to react and respond to its own unique experience in any way it wants, and no reaction or response by any player is wrong or better than any other reaction or response. 6. Whatever feelings the player has in reaction or response to any experience are transmitted back to its infinite I, which is why the player was created in the first place, the whole point of the human game. 7. No player can experience anything that their infinite I did not create and want for them, and no other player can say or do anything in your movie that your infinite I did not agree to and approve. There can be no victims or perpetrators. 8. Nothing and no one out there has any power over you as a player unless you give them that power by your beliefs. And 9. Each holographic experience chosen and downloaded by your infinite I is in the present moment. Any memories of the past and any references to the future are simply storylines in that present moment holographic 3D total immersion movie. So, in conclusion, according to this human game model, who am I? I am a player representing my infinite I in the human game. Why am I here? What's my purpose? I'm here to have outer holographic experiences created by my infinite I, to which I am free to react and respond with feelings, so that my infinite I can share in the inner experiences. In the next workshop, we will look at how these models, the field model, the holographic universe model, the consciousness model, and the human game model, are specifically applied to life. And we're going to use the example of money and how it works in this holographic universe. But there's one more short video I want you to watch before we end. It's called Plato's Cave, an allegory written appropriately by Plato.
Imagine prisoners that have spent their entire lives chained deep inside a cave. They have been chained so that they cannot see behind themselves. And they are forced to stare endlessly at the cave wall in front of them. Behind them, a fire is burning. And between the prisoners and the fire is a raised walkway. Now imagine that each day, a menagerie of objects crosses the walkway. Animals, and people carrying their wares to market. Their shapes create an intricate shadow play on the wall in front of the prisoners. This is the only world that the prisoners have ever known. The shadows and the echoes of unseen objects. Now, imagine that a prisoner is released. After some time adjusting to the blinding light, the freed prisoner will begin to experience the world outside of the cave for the very first time. And it is like nothing he could have ever imagined. With his new perception of the world, the man will of course want to return to his friends to share his incredible discoveries. But the prisoners cannot recognize their old friend. He appears as all things do. His voice is a distorted echo, and his body is a grotesque shadow. They cannot understand his fantastic stories of the world outside of the cave. To them, it will never exist.
We've all been living in Plato's cave for our entire lives. Some of us have been trying to understand and explain why living in the cave is so difficult, so futile, and yes, even so boring at times, like trying to win at tic-tac-toe. Your infinite eye is inviting you to see the cave for what it is, a game, a ride that isn't real, like Disney World's Pirates of the Caribbean, and walk out of the cave to start playing the second part of the human game. I only know this because you wouldn't be watching these workshops and getting this information if your infinite eye were not ready, or close to ready, for you to find the exit door in the back of the cave. Your homework, what I want you to do in preparation to watch part 5 of this workshop series, is to watch the movie called Yes Man with Jim Carrey, and then practice saying yes to each and every experience you have, knowing it was created specifically for you by your infinite eye as a gift down to the smallest detail.